Welcome, everyone. We're so happy and excited to be sharing this evening with you. It's come together wildly, beautifully, and I'm pretty excited about our evening lineup. I'm just going to be quick and brief and let everyone know who doesn't already know as fundraiser that this is actually a fundraising event for Lama Foundation. If you don't know anything about Lama Foundation, we'll post some links. If you've come and you haven't yet made a small donation, please consider logging in. I will put in the chat box a link right now so that you know where to go. Okay, maybe after I'm done talking so I don't mess it up. We'd love a small donation just to keep the foundation going and continue on the legacy of our beloved Ram Dass. So have a wonderful evening, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kaya, who is broadcasting from the Dome on Lama land with the Lama community. Kaya?
Welcome, and thank you all for being here. And of course, we wouldn't be here at Lama Foundation, sitting in the Dome, and in this online retreat together without Ram Dass. Ram Dass left his body last December, and his teachings and spirit are still very alive in many of us individually and in our community as a whole. Ram Dass was integral to what has become the essence of Lama Foundation. And we are honored to have many special guests this evening who will speak to that and pay tribute to Ram Dass through song, stories, and dance. And before I introduce our first guest, I want to bring into this sacred virtual container an original copy of Be Here Now, written by Ram Dass, and artwork done by Lama Foundation residents and friends. The original Be Here Now was called From Bindu to Ojas. So joining us to open the evening is Sitaram Das of Kripa Kirtan. Kripa is a collaborative group that shares kirtan, dharma, and workshops and writings. They offer affordable donation-based services and prison outreach. Other members of Kripa were hoping to be here with us tonight, and they are weathering a hurricane on Maui.
Actually, update, Kaya, yes. They made it.
They made it!
Yeah, maybe you guys could just say something real quick so we can all see you.
Hello, Ram
Hey,
Ram.
Ram Ram.
Pawan and Hari here. We're here on Maui. We're anticipating Hurricane Douglas. But right now it's just wind and rain. And so our dear brother Sitaram has agreed to lead the chant this evening. We're so happy to be here with everyone.
Welcome. Well, then without further ado, I will pass it off to Kripa Kirtan to open the evening.
Thank you. Bhavan and Hari, it's really good to see you. So I just want to say I'm really grateful to be here. It's truly an honor to be able to honor our collective teacher in this way. And so I thought I would just start us off by singing a short invocation of the Guru Stotram. It's a chant that invokes the presence of the Guru and honors the Guru, both the inner Guru and then also those beings that represent that physically, and those beings that point us to that Guru within. And so I just want to dedicate this to Ram Dass, and I'll just sing.
Vyaktamandalagaram Vyaptam yena churachuram Tatpadam dashitam yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Jnanati Mirandhasya Jnananjana Sulakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Dhavaram Jangamam Yatam Yakanchit Sachurachuram Tatpadam Dashitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Chinmayam Yapadam Sarvam Trilokyam Sachurachuram Asitvam Tashitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sarvashuti Shri Ratnaha Rajata Padam Pujaha Vedantam Puja Suryoya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Chaitanyam Shashvatam Shantam Vyomatitam Niranjanam Nadipindukalatitam Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jnana Shakti Samaruraha Tattvamala Vibhushitaha Bhukti Mukti Pradatacha Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Aneka Jama Samprapta Karma Bandha Vidahine Atmajnana Pradhanena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shoshanam Bhavasindhusja Yapanam Sarasam Paraha Guru Paratakam Samyak Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Na Guru Radhikam Tattvam Na Guru Radhikam Tapaha Na Guru Radhikam Jnanam Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Manata Shri Jagannatha Madguru Shri Jagadguru Madatma Sarva Bhutatma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Guru Radharanadischa Guru Param Daivatam Guru Parataram Nasti Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Yat Satyena Jagat Sarvam Yat Prakashena Bhrantiya Yadanandena Nandaiti Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nitya-shudham nirabhasam Nirakaram niranjanam Nitya-bodham chidanandam Guru Brahman Mam Yaham Dhyanamulam Guru Murti Pujamulam Guru Padam Mantramulam Guru Vakyam Mokshamulam Guru Kripa Namami Sri Guru Padapalavam Smarami Sri Guru Namanirmalam Pashyami Sri Guru Rupa Sundaram Shanomi Sri Guru Kirti Adbhutam Kiyavara Ramachandra Ki Jai.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sitaram Das. And now welcome Sadiq von Briesen. Sadiq was the fourth coordinator of the Lama Foundation, having lived there from 1969 to 1971 and 1973 to 1977. He remains a continuing member and has served as a trustee and a member of the Lama Council. So thank you, Sadiq, who will be sharing a history of Ram Dass at Lama Foundation.
Thank you. In the early summer of 1969, my family and I were at Lama hoping to stay. Frances was pregnant with our third child. Barbara and Steve Durkee had started Lama 2 years before, and we had been there twice already. Barbara, now Asha, told us that their old friend Richard Alpert had gone to India and was back in the US as Baba Ram Dass, with teachings to share, and that he was going to visit Lama for a few days, and that everyone at Lama who wanted to be there at that time, the three of them were planning a 7-week ashram at Lama in the fall, and that everyone at Lama who wanted to be there at that time had to be part of the ashram and needed his permission. So if we wanted to join, we could ask him during his visit, which we did. When I went to my interview with Ram Dass in the Teacher's Dome, sometimes called the Pant Dome, I saw an open, friendly man with a beard and long hair, not much on top, wearing a white robe. I only remember one part of the conversation. After we talked about my background, he asked if I had any questions for him. I asked, why go on the spiritual path? Why go on the spiritual path? Was that a stupid question or a profound question? I asked it sincerely, but I believe now that I was also unconsciously testing him. He smiled as he thought about it, and then said, because nothing else is enough. He elaborated a little, but he didn't need to. Because nothing else is enough. We joined that 7-week ashram. In one of his talks then, he spoke of virag, or disillusionment, as being an important step on the path. Repeated steps, perhaps, as we negotiate our lives. I believe it was during that ashram that we dedicated the prayer room with the 24-hour chant of Om Mani Padme Hum. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, our number dwindled to 2 or 3, but with the first light, we all rejoined. He had a collection of transcripts of the talks he made around the country since he had returned from India. No publisher wanted them. He and Steve concocted the Bindu to Ojas box, which now all of you have seen, at least electronically. Steve was the designer and producer, and a team of artists at Lama, led by Steve, constructed the core book, illustrated around the texts of Ram Dass's transcripts. 50 cents plus a name and address got you a box by US mail. Later, to reach a wider audience and to fund more teaching, Ram Dass and Steve decided to put the contents of the box into a trade paperback called Be Here Now. It was published in April 1971. Given the choice between a print run of 5,000 copies or 10,000, we decided to risk printing 10,000. I believe that more than 1 million have been printed since. Though he never actually lived as a resident at Lama physically, Ram Dass was an important guide, teacher, and friend to Lama Foundation and to its community. A letter quoted at length in the film Fierce Grace, written to parents bereft of a daughter in one of the worst ways we can think of, showed most powerfully his skillful compassion and friendship. He was a true friend to so many of us, then desperate for meaning in a difficult world. He still is.
Thank you, Sadiq. I'm now honored to welcome Nina Rao. Nina Rao met Ram Dass through Krishna Das when she organized Ram Dass's first event with Krishna Das in New York City after the stroke. Since then, she has been fortunate to receive Ram Dass's teachings on retreat regularly and received many a grandfatherly hug that we all love. She will sing a chant that Ram Dass used to love to listen to from her first CD. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you so much. I think you might have noticed, all of you, that there was a little bit of a whistling sound with the harmonium when Sitaram Das was singing. So I'm just going to try it again. Tell me if you hear it, and if you do, I'm going to sing without the harmonium. Do you hear that, Tracy? How does it sound? Or Heather?
Sounds very clean. There's no whistling. Yeah.
Okay. Well, write something in the chat if you hear something, okay? So I'm very honored to be invited here tonight. Many of you have known Ram Dass longer and maybe for longer periods of time than I have. But he's been a thread in my life ever since I met him. We've all read his books. It's been so helpful for my family. And also just hanging out with him. I think the thing that I remember most and I feel the most is his immense presence in silence, which is how it was when I first met him. It was soon after the stroke, so he really wasn't speaking much. And when I think about him, I still feel that. But he did love chanting. And this is a chant actually that I learned from another elder from our satsang. His name is K.K. Shah, also Ram Dass's very close friend and Indian brother. The words for the chant are, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girija Pati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare. Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Pati Hare, Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare. Shiva Shankara Hare, Girijapati Hare, Rama Raghava Hare, Janaki Pati Hare, Krishna Keshava Hare, Rukmini Shiva Shankar Hare Girijapati Hare Rama Raghava Hare Janaki Pati Hare Krishna Keshav Hare Rukmini Pati Hare Shiva Shankar Hare Girijapati Hare Rama Raghava Hare Janaki Pati Hare Krishna Keshav Hare Rukmini Pati Hare Pati Hare. Dear Ramdas, thank you for explaining everything in a way that we could understand. Thank you for your ongoing presence in silence and all your blessings.
Tracy, I think we've lost the Lama Residence Dome. Would you like to be showcased?
I can certainly introduce our next guest. I'm sure the dome will come back online. Well, I'm not going to give my long soliloquy that I did yesterday, but our next guest is one of the founders of Lama Foundation and Sadiq's sister, Asha Greer. She's known Ram Dass for a very long time, way before he went to India, in fact. She is going to tell us some stories. Asha? Asha, make sure you unmute yourself so we can hear you.
So in 1963, Richard Alpert was a teaching assistant in psychology when I took Psychology 101. That was in 1953. And he was a fantastic salesman for psychology. Was what he was completely what he was about. And I went for some question to him, and then we made friends, and then we started giving little Friday evening small select dinners for people who might be interested in subjects that were interested in us. I was interested in art, he was interested in psychology, so we served spaghetti and wine dinners in which we would discuss things like, do you have to be neurotic to be creative? And that was interesting at that time. And I knew very little about his life, except that lots of women fell in love with him. And then, so that was a kind of a friendship that we had. And then he was always extremely funny. He had one of the funniest wits I'd ever encountered. And then in about 1963, my husband and I took Stuart Brand to Millbrook to see the psychedelic gurus, of whom he was, of course, one. And we had been experimenting with it. And again, my friendship with his and his with my husband just became much, much stronger. So in 1965, when we went to California, we went and visited him in Los Altos, where he had been hired to unscramble all the new math courses. A lot of you probably took new math, but this is when I found out that new math was not understood by most adults, because they had 2 warehouses filled with new math exams that some of you may have taken, which nobody could figure out how to grade them. So he was paid very well to support us also in this endeavor. So we had a wonderful time in Los Altos in a beautiful home, taking acid every Friday night, during which we did a lot of psychological study and a lot of spiritual work and a terrific amount of hysterical laughing. And this was his first occurrence. He'd been giving people a lot of advice about children. And I think he collaborated even on a book on rearing children. And he found himself quite embarrassed that my daughter, Dakota, had not proven to fill out any of his prescriptions. That he realized he didn't know anything about children at that point, and he was quite willing to admit it. And he thought it was very funny, which I did too. So at that time, among other things, he was getting extremely famous. He brought a whole bunch of people who'd been with Neeman Karoli Baba in India back to the United States with him, who were still, part of that movement and that way of thinking and being and learning. And then he started getting invited to give talks around the country, which we accompanied him on, my husband and I and my daughter, my new daughter. She was around 1.5 or 2. And in our house, when that wasn't happening, what we were doing was just answering the telephone and writing and living a very complete and very, very fun life. I mean, it was just fun because there wasn't very much pressure, and he didn't feel pressured about these tests. He felt so unpressured about them, he never talked about them. And that was pretty interesting in itself, that he was so present even at that point, that we just talked about what was happening. Although one of the things that we talked about a lot was ways, because the mafia was taking over the whole acid. Most of the people we knew were taking acid for highly spiritual reasons and trying to stay very clear on when they used it. And so the mafia had discovered that that was another, quote, drug. And they started knocking on the doors of all the people who were making it and making it very clear that they would be happy to hire them, but that they couldn't do it on their own any longer. And the government was also beginning to clamp down. So that's kind of slowed down our journey. It didn't slow down his one bit. We started working with somebody else and left Los Altos, and we had a bus that we bought to go on tour with, which we never got around to doing because we were too busy to get that together. And that was the turquoise bus then, and then we painted it yellow to get across the country so police cars wouldn't notice us. And then now it's at Lama, and it's been there ever since then. So that's how the bus happened. There was a school for my child and the people I picked up to have tours with in the afternoon, so I'd have time off. And I think probably a lot of people of you have even stayed in that bus or been in it or visited Robbie in it. So anyway, off he went to India, and at the end of those Los Altos talks, we went back to New York, and he met Neeman Karoli Baba. And that was a time when he actually had such a major change in his persona. His persona was extremely outgoing, and he was basically in a kind of a mode of that had been pretty, pretty cynical. It was when he was at Millbrook that the acid had taken. And this was before we went to, I guess that was before we went to Los Altos. I apologize for my terrible memory. But anyway, then after we lived with him in, I guess we were at Millbrook first. I don't know if you knew about Millbrook, but it was a very wild, acid, Tibetan Book of the Dead, wild place where the whole hippie thing went into a mode of something a lot more elegant and expensive and colorful. And I remember watching the first color TV there. But they were taking, there was a group of them who were taking acid daily with huge amounts of doses and just experimenting and trying desperately to get enlightened through any means possible. And at that time, there was a strong feeling that it could lead to enlightenment. So it was after that we were in Los Altos together, and we had come to visit him with Stuart. So we had decided that we wanted, and had talked about this a lot, either spiritual communities or spiritual dude ranches, however you wanted to look at it, dome communities and psychedelic light ships, because of the invasion of both the government and the mafia to get this LSD thing stopped, because it was dangerous to both of them. And so we thought we had that going outside whatever the lines are outside that keep you from any national disaster ownership things happening. So when he came back, that's when he brought the people to Lama. He brought quite a few people to Lama for the first retreat. And those retreats continued, and the main one that I can remember was one that was where he put everyone in retreat for 3 days. None of us had done a retreat like that before. A silent retreat where you didn't do anything but sit. I don't remember having done any practices, but just being totally quiet. And I had practices that I was doing already. I can't remember whether he gave us practices or not. But what impressed me really a lot about him was that he just had the greatest time pushing a sled that we had piled with all the food to all the people who were going on retreats, and he liked delivering the food. And it was up a very steep hill where I was staying, and there was a couple of places that were even higher than that he took all this food to. And that was, I think it was twice a day that happened. He didn't do it all of those times, but in that 3-day period, what had happened to me was I found silence at a very deep level, and this silence has really run my life. Not that anything is ever completely silent. You can always hear something is murmuring in the background, but it's always present. And in spite of the fact that even, as his awakening made a continual silence possible, And by the time he had, way before he'd had his stroke, that silence was available to anybody who knew how to listen for it or who had experienced it before. So I know that he was sometimes quite a coyote, in the sense that he would, embellish the truth to make his reality, the reality of possible enlightenment and possible breaking through, seem easier than it was, or funnier than it is. I was told by one friend that he had said that he had gotten so tired of fun that if anybody wanted to have fun, that he didn't like that, because he wanted to be in this very silent space a lot of the time and not be diverted from it so much. But I love the fun part of him, because he was uniquely comedic without trying at all. He was just having such a good time all the time. Anyway, that's all I have to say right now. So thank you. Be happy. Don't worry. Joy.
All right. Thank you, Asha. And I'm sorry I was not able to introduce you. I believe Ram Dass often said, it's important not to expect anything, including the internet, to work. Next, I believe I am welcoming Rameshwar Das. And Rameshwar Das first met Ram Dass when he first returned from India in the spring of 1968. He has worked with Ram Dass on many projects, including a peripheral role on Be Here Now, and has co-authored 2 of Ram Dass's recent books, Be Love Now and Polishing the Mirror. He is completing Ram Dass's memoir for publication next January, so keep an eye out for that. So I welcome Rameshwar Das now, who will tell us more stories.
There we go. I don't think my stories are as good as Asha's. Asha was also, you were roommate to the mother of Ram Dass' son, I believe, at one point. Is that right?
I was actually in the hall, in the dormitory hall with her. Yes, I was. She was extremely intelligent and quite formal. And I was much too silly for her. I mean, she was kind of a nerd, and I didn't know how to be a nerd.
It sounds like those, what was it, Homer Lane? Was that the place?
Yes, it was Homer Lane. But
Yeah.
the amazing thing is when he was at Stanford before,
Yeah.
because there were 2 houses, he had been in the house right next door to it on Homer Lane. I thought that was magical, his capacity to do that, to get that house.
And Ken Kesey was not far away.
He was not far away, and he was also part of the experiments on Acidin that were being done at Stanford Hospital, which is where Nurse Ratched came from.
Yeah. You had some good times. I'm going to read a little bit of the memoir, fragments, basically. This first one is from the spring before Ram Dass went to India, and he went to, he was with Caroline Winter, who was his girlfriend at the time, and for quite a long time thereafter, who is now Rukmini. So, and this is after he had been living with Asha, Noor, Steve, and Barbara in Los Altos. That spring, Caroline and I decided to take a break from New York. Steve and Barbara Durkee had left Los Altos, California, and moved north of Taos, New Mexico, where they purchased land for the commune we'd all dreamed of. It was called the Lama Foundation after the cluster of homes down the mountain. In Spanish, lama is mud or slime after the spring mud season and the thick mix used to make the adobes for the buildings. The Durkees invited us to visit. Caroline and I flew to California to pick up the blue bus, and together we drove through Arizona and New Mexico. We stopped off at various festivals, and as soon as people heard I was there, they'd line up to speak with me about psychedelics. It was a fun odyssey. When we got to the Durkees in Santa Fe, we went up to see the property in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, north of Taos. Herman Rednick, a mystic painter who became a spiritual mentor for Lama Foundation, had helped find the land. A friend, Jonathan Altman, a Zen and Tai Chi practitioner who lived near us in Los Altos, helped buy it. The land outside the hamlet of Cuesta was sacred to the Taos Pueblo Indians. We met with them, everyone sitting outdoors in chairs, dressed in our Sunday best. Lama would be a self-sustaining, intentional community and a spiritual school. All spiritual traditions would be honored. The Taos Pueblo and Native American church elders also became mentors. Then he was getting ready to leave for India. Said, since there were no buildings on the property yet, Caroline and I lived in the bus. We had some beautiful moments watching sunsets together over the sweep of the mesas below the mountains. Meanwhile, David had gotten the Land Rover outfitted for our trip, creating a consummate overland chariot, pop-up roof, beds that flip down, refrigerator, toilet, sound system. That same summer, the Durkees began building Lama Foundation. Caroline stayed to help, digging trenches for the first water pipes and making adobe bricks. As the buildings came together, she let the Durkees take her place on the bus. Steve and Barbara had 2 daughters by then, and later would have 2 more. Many of us have come and gone at the Lama Foundation over the intervening years, but the bus remains there as a dwelling. Meanwhile, after yet another police raid that culminated in the arrests of 40 people, Tim had closed the big house at Millbrook, retreating into a tent in the woods. But I was buoyant, I was ready. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band had just been released. From all across America, 150,000 young people were about to descend on San Francisco for the Summer of Love. This would be the Summer of Love for me, too, in an entirely different way. And this is from just after he came back from India. This is a little bit of the story of Be Here Now coming into being at Lama, of which I understand there are many versions. I saw Maharaji's monkey hand and the karmic stew at every turn. His trademark was the constant parade of coincidences and synchronicities, lubricating everything. This became especially evident that winter when I drove to the Lama Foundation, the Durkees' new community in the mountains of New Mexico. By this time, Lama was an impressive work in progress. The residents had built a geodesic dome complex along with a kiva-like prayer room. There was also an octagonal kitchen building with an upstairs dining area. They had incorporated the Lama Foundation with the stated purpose of serving, quote, as an instrument for the awakening of consciousness, and they welcomed spiritual seekers. The residents, self-styled Lama Beans, lived on the grounds and pitched in with construction, gardening, and cooking. I ran Lama's first spiritual retreat and my first as Ram Dass. It was a 7-week winter retreat for Lama residents and a few of my students. We were up at 8,600 feet in the cold crystalline air of New Mexico. Looking west over the ancient seabed of the Rio Grande Basin, we saw the breathtaking sunsets. Each participant lived in seclusion for a week in an individual cabin. Every day I'd go around in the snow and visit each soloist. The cabin became the mind world of the person inhabiting it. Together we worked on individual practice. I also delivered food, which I loved doing, because it reminded me of Maharaji, who was always giving out prasad. After the retreat, a big picture of Maharaji went up in the kitchen, where he became a presence in the lives of Lama Beans from then on. Participants also came to my cabin to check in and talk. There was a bell at the bottom of my cabin stairs. The person leaving would ring the bell at the end of the interview so the next person could come. It was like a Zen Dokusan. I'm going to interrupt and see if Krishnadas would kick in a little bit here, because he was at that retreat and I was not. And maybe he would like
That's
to,
about all I remember, that I was there and you were not. I don't remember much except snow. My dog, I, was there.
Yeah.
And yeah, very little, except it was extraordinary to be there and spend time up at the mountain so long that winter. It was amazing. Yeah. That's about it.
Okay, I'm going to read some more. Some of the Native American elders who'd helped with the community development came up to visit, including little Joe Gomez of the Taos Pueblo. He was an early mentor of Lama. After Steve had designed the dome complex, little Joe had directed its construction. Because the land was a sacred site, a part of the heritage of Native Americans, it was important to all of us that we receive their spiritual input on how the land should be used. Later, we attended peyote ceremonies at the Native American church down the mountain. We were forming a bond that remained an important current in the stream of spiritual teaching flowing through Lama. Another person who came to Lama was Carolyn Winter, my ex. After her architectural tour of India, she'd gone to London to take care of her mother and then returned to the US. We reconnected briefly in Big Sur when I was teaching at Esalen and realized we both planned to be at Lama at the same time. When I first arrived at Lama, Steve took my bags out of my car and noticed the transcripts of the sculpture studio talks still sitting in my trunk. As John Bleibtreu, who's a writer and novelist, had said at Esalen, he asked, "What's that?" Steve read them with care, paying attention to the passages that John had marked. He was also inspired. Like Steve, several of the Lama Beans were artists. Tenny Kimmel, later Sharda singer, Jody Dwarka Bonner, Hans Sadiq von Briesen, and his then wife, Frances. Over dinner, we began to brainstorm ways that the passages could be illustrated and turned into a book. We decided to create a 12 by 12 inch corrugated box like a pizza box, containing a book, photos of Indian saints, a reading list, and an LP vinyl record of kirtan chanting. A do-it-yourself kit for awakening. The book was titled From Bindu to Ojas, meaning from material to spiritual energy. The book would tell the story of my journey to Maharaji and include a how-to for yoga and spiritual practices called a spiritual cookbook. I worked on the text for each page, and when I was done, Steve would take it to the artists. I'd like to work on that one would say, and get to illustrating. Steve coordinated the design and production. The pages were printed on brown paper and hand-bound with twine. I went out touring and lecturing to raise the money to produce From Bindu to Ojas boxes. Over the next several months, I spoke in California, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut. I spoke on college campuses and at churches. I was invited to speak at the Menninger Foundation, the famed psychiatric clinic in Topeka, Kansas. I also lectured at the Alternative Media Conference at Goddard College in Vermont, a gathering of underground reporters, radio DJs, record company promoters, cartoonists, musicians, and poets. The Hog Farm, the hippie commune that helped run Woodstock a year earlier, led by peace activist and clown Wavy Gravy, ran a campsite for the conference. I'm going to skip some odds and ends. At each talk, I told people about From Bindu to Ojas and handed out postcards they could send in to Lama to secure a free copy. The money from my lectures covered printing and production costs, and that spring, we mailed out about 1,000 boxes, but so many people were sending in requests that we quickly ran out. We did another printing, but demand was still outpacing what we could produce. So Steve reached out to a guy in New York who had attended one of my talks at the Universalist Church, a sales manager for Crown Publishing named Bruce Harris. After the talk, Bruce had asked if I'd thought about writing a book and given me his card. Now I actually had a book. Bruce flew to Albuquerque and met us at a Ramada Inn. Steve and I spread out the artwork for the core book on the 2 double beds. Bruce loved it so much, he took one of the boxes back to New York to show his boss at Crown. His boss, also his publishing mentor, said, well, okay, let's show it to the editor-in-chief and see what he says. The editor said, there's no way you should publish all this drug stuff. This guy is notorious. It will blacken our name as publishers. Bruce went home, and the next day he went into his boss's office. He said, look, there are 3 ways we can do this. We can publish the book, or we can do a distribution deal, or I'm going to quit. His mentor looked up in surprise and saw that Bruce was serious. He replied, okay, we'll work something out. Crown distributed the book. Bruce didn't think From Bindu to Ojas would fly as a title, and he suggested the simpler Be Here Now. We agreed. The first printing of 7,500 copies sold out quickly. When Bruce saw a young man reading it on the subway, he knew it would do well. It went on to sell more than 2 million copies. It was carried in the backpacks of thousands of people on their spiritual journeys. It would be called the Counterculture Bible and influence seekers as varied as Steve Jobs, George Harrison, and Michael Crichton. Be Here Now is the book Maharaji gave his blessing for. Ram Ram.
Thank you, Rameshwar Das. And I just feel called to hold this up again, this original copy of From Bindu to Ojas. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Mirabai Starr. Mirabai writes about women's wisdom across the spiritual traditions and contemporary translations of the mystics. She moved to Lama on her own at age 14, where she fell in love with Ram Dass and followed him around like a puppy for the rest of his life. Welcome, Mirabai.
Thank you, Kaya. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. This will be a very short passage from my memoir, A Caravan of No Despair, which I dedicated to Ram Dass. So this was 1975 and 76 when I was, I had met Ram Dass at Lama when I was 14, and then followed him to New York when I was 15 to be with a teacher of ours, and then came back to Lama pretty quickly. And then Ram Dass came back to Lama that following summer. So that's where we are. At this point, I think I had just turned 16. And I was having this propensity for altered states of consciousness. Every time I'd sit down to meditate, I would kind of go out. And I was struggling with this. I wasn't enjoying that at all. And so Stephen Levine had come to Lama to teach a death and dying retreat, and it was very much meditation based. And so I tried to talk to Stephen about this tendency I had to kind of lose the boundaries of my sense of self. And he had told me that I should just keep my eyes open when I meditate, and if that didn't work, to chop vegetables. Meditation isn't about getting high, with all due respect to my friend Ram Dass, Stephen said. It's about being fully present. Well, anyway, and so later that season, Ram Dass himself showed up at Lama, and I gave up trying to keep myself grounded. Safe in his psychic embrace, I had full license to blast off and away from the present moment. I finally felt free to let the margins of my individuated consciousness dissolve into the sky. Not only was I permitted to chant myself into a drunken stupor, but that also seemed to be the point. This was the path of bhakti yoga, lover disappearing into beloved. That was the first of several summers I served as Ram Dass's Lama liaison. Every morning I appeared at his RV bearing sliced grapefruit and a cup of black tea with milk, sugar, and ground cardamom. If Ram Dass had wanted a newspaper and slippers, I would have gladly delivered them in my mouth. I was smitten. I only wanted to make him happy. Ram Dass always asked how I was and inquired about my sadhana, but I kept quiet, trying to be unobtrusive, finding out what he needed and then slipping away. I was proud of this, determined not to be needy, disdainful of the adults around me who were always clamoring for Ram Dass's attention. Before Ram Dass came into the dome for his teachings each day, I would light the incense, wave it in front of Maharaji's picture as I had seen others do, plump up Ram Dass's zafu, and straighten the Persian rug where he would be sitting. Then I would press my back against the adobe wall, close enough to respond if he needed anything, but far enough away to remain unnoticed. Throughout those early years, I cultivated my invisibility, determined to eradicate my ego. The fact that I was too young to have had a chance to develop an ego escaped me. I think that's enough for now. So thank you. I think I'm going to give it on over to my spiritual siblings here, since I know this evening is going longer than we had anticipated. So thank you. Much love. I miss Ram Dass. I miss him with all my heart.
Thank you, Mirabai, for that excerpt. And now I'm excited to welcome Krishna Das. When Krishna Das met Ram Dass for the first time in 1968, that's when he met Ram Dass for the first time. They were friends for over 50 years. When he met Ram Dass, he met Maharaji's presence. Turn it over to you now, Krishna Das.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Ram Dass was really special. He turned the lights on for a lot of people. When I walked into the room where he was sitting at his father's place in New Hampshire in the winter of 68, 69, the moment I walked into that room, without a word being spoken, even without eye contact, just into the room. Boom. At that moment, I knew that whatever it was that I was looking for was real. It existed. It was in the world. You could find it. This was a really big thing. Because there was only like 3 books on this stuff, you know, in those days, and there wasn't a yoga studio and a meditation place on every corner. So that was, and I had read those books, but still, they're books. But this was completely different. So from that moment on, I was determined to spend every minute I could with Ram Dass, and like Mirabai, I was just a bigger puppy running around after him. And I was there at Lama at that long retreat in the winter of '69. And I remember we used to gather in the dome and we read out from a book called The Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita by an Englishman who lived in India his whole life named Sri Krishna Prem. And that reading every day out loud, that rewired my brain. That was an incredible experience. One thing about the Be Here Now book, I was there in India, of course, with Ram Dass when he brought the first copy of Be Here Now for Maharaji to look at. And he handed the book to Maharaji, and Maharaji gave it to somebody, and it went into his room. The next day we came to the temple. Maharaji looks at Ram Dass and says, "Ram Dass, there's lies in this book." Ram Dass said, "What?" He said, "There's lies." Then Maharaji had somebody tell him a few things that didn't seem to be true about things somebody had said. So Maharaji said, "Ram Dass, you have to take those lies out of there." So Ram Dass said, "Well, Baba, you know, we'll do it on the next printing." "Nay, truth is more important than money. You have to do it now." So Ram Dass went back to Nainital, the town we were staying in, and with great difficulty he booked a call back to the US to speak to Steve Noor Turkey. And he said to Steve, he said, "You know, we have to redo the book. We have to fix something. There's some things in there that aren't true, and Maharaji wants me to change it." And Steve said, "Well, just this morning," now he was back home in Cuesta, I think, he said, "Just this morning I dropped the final proofs off at the printer, and they're going to start printing now. They probably already started printing. So it's too late." Okay, so Ram Dass came back the next day to Maharaji and told him, and Maharaji said, "Nay, you have to change it." So that day again he went back to town and he called Steve, and Steve said, "You'll never believe what happened. I called the printer right away after we got off the phone, and I figured that, you know, he had already gone ahead and printed 5,000 copies or 10,000 copies." He said, "But just as they started to print, the plate, the photo plate with Maharaji's picture, fell and broke, and they had to stop the printing." So those lies, or so-called lies, were taken out of the book, and the printing continued a little later. So Maharaji knows how to print his own book. You know, Ram Dass was a person just like all of us, but there was an incredible fire burning in his heart. And he wanted love more than he wanted anything else. Not that he didn't want other things, which he did, like we all do. But the desire to be in that love 24 hours a day with Maharaji, in that place with Maharaji, that was the deepest desire that he had. And over the years, the many years that we knew each other, you could feel how he was ripening and softening, and how that love inside of him was deepening more and more, getting deeper and deeper. I used to tease him in the later days. I said to him, you know, you finally become who we thought you were 40 years ago. And he would laugh. He would laugh. But in this life, he was the one who turned the lights on for me. And he showed me that it was all real. And then I went to see Maharaji, and I realized I had already known Maharaji for that whole year and a half before I actually met him, because I felt him through Ram Dass. And it was great, great blessing for this life. So, the mantra that he first taught us to sing in his own very Western way was Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. So I'm just going to sing that for a couple of minutes. It's wishing? Well, let's do that. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. 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 Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram.
Thank you, Krishna Das. So the last special guest that I have the honor to introduce this evening is Jai Uttal, Grammy-nominated sacred music composer, recording artist, multi-instrumentalist, and ecstatic vocalist. Music and spiritual practice became inextricably linked for Jai when he met the great Indian saint Neem Karoli Baba in 1971. Kirtan would become the center of Jai's musical and spiritual life, giving him what he calls his soul support system. Welcome, Jai.
Thank you. Unmute myself. There we are. I'm so happy to be here. That bio really should be altered because the most important thing is a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba. The other stuff is just, well, it's nice, you know. Anyway, I'm just here to sing a little bit, and I remember long ago being at Lama so many times with Ram Dass, and you know, being so young and so entranced, and thankfully that enchantment has never gone away. So Om Guruve Namaha. Om Guruve Namaha. Om Guruve Namaha. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Para Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Janamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Param, Mantramulam Guru Vakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Para Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Janamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Param, Mantramulam Guru Vakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Guru Om, Guru Om, Guru Om, Om Guru Om, Guru Om, Guru Om, Guru Om, Om Guru Om. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Let's do one more short Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram I hope you guys are singing with me. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Ram. Om Shri Rama Jai Ram. Shri Rama Jai Ram. Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Ram. Om Shri Rama Jai Ram. Shri Rama Jai Ram. Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Ram. Satguru Deva Bhagavan Ki Jai. Shri 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 Bhavanim Karoli Santa Maharaj Ki Jai. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, here we go. So Dasi, tell them where we are right now.
Right now, we are in Ram Dass's study. This is a place where he loved more than any place else in the house or on Maui. Right over here is his comfortable lazy boy chair that he spent a good time during the day in. Yeah, right next to his books and the view. He loved the view. He would sit here and just be content. He'd look at the clouds and the formation of the clouds and the water. He loved being near the water. That was so important to him. He'd listen to the birds, and it was just beautiful for him. He has his iPad here, and he usually had 5 or 6 books going up until the last several months, and he just loved to read about spiritual things. Over here we have the tucket, which we've kept up, and this is where his body was for 4 days after his death. And it was also his massage table. Yeah. And he had a couple of puja tables upstairs as well as a main one downstairs. But this is the pictures of his loved ones and his family, and it was getting pretty full. And over here, these are special little things, and of course, Maharaji. Yeah. And here is his favorite picture of Maharaji, which he loved to look at. And repeat. I am loving awareness. 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 I am loving awareness.
It's really hard to follow all that up. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you who have made offerings tonight of music and story and dance. I'm going to let Kaya say the final closing, as she so eloquently does. And I just wanted to put one more plug in for Lama Foundation before we go. Heather, who is my partner in crime here on the tech side of things, is going to pop a few things into the chat box. There's a follow-up form for anyone who wants to stay connected and give feedback to us. And the link, again, if you are feeling inspired to make a donation to keep Lama Foundation going so we can continue to make offerings like this one. And I thank you again all. That was just so heartwarming. I'm going to turn it over to Kaya. Thank you, guys.
I actually don't want to add many more words, and instead invite us for just these last few moments, to sit in silence and savor what we have woven together tonight. And from this space, I invite you all to join me in bowing deeply to all of our special guests this evening and our teacher, Ram Dass. Have a beautiful evening, everyone, and let us remember that we are all just walking each other home. Thank you.